come out behind the blue curtain and wait for working. Right, that's live. And that's live. I'm recording on this. So hit this button. Hello and welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of different movies about fighting demons. But before we do that, Buddy, I want to tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast.
On this podcast, we choose movies from 20 years ago, but then also a recent movie based on an exorcism, but not the Exorcist movie that just came out. So if you're here because there's an Exorcist movie that was just in theaters and you think we're reviewing that movie, we're not. We're talking about The Pope's Exorcist, which is a Netflix movie from earlier this year. It's complicated, you guys, but we decided to talk about it.
Yeah, no, I have also watched an additional thing, which is the first episode of 30 Coins, which is also weirdly kind of in this vein of things. But yeah, let's give, I guess, our spoiler-free impressions of Constantine and the Pope's Exorcist. Constantine, you might be a little bit out of luck, but it's been like 20 years. But
yeah, I remember Constantine rocked. I loved Constantine when I was a kid, but it fell away in kind of this. There's this mid 2000s movie soup that kind of gets brewed in like the cauldron of culture, right? And Constantine is very much one of those movies. You've got I don't know, it like I don't want to say formulaic because it's not super formulaic, but it just yeah, I don't know.
Technically, this is a pre-MCU superhero dip, right? Like,
yeah.
Because John Constantine is a DC superhero. I remember at the time,
Charging battery.
and maybe I'm wrong about this, but like my understanding is that the critical reception was bad, and I had not watched it. But I thought I watched it this time. I thought it was great. I thought it was fun, right? I didn't think it was like high cinema or anything, right? But I had a lot of fun watching it. I don't know why people thought this movie was like bad. I have my suspicions about like maybe like mid-aughts like atheism type stuff, because this is a movie that is very steeped in Christian esoterica, right? So it's either, I could see it coming from both ends actually. I could see it being like the wave, like the wave of proto Reddit atheists being like nah, and also like the Christians being like nah, like that. It felt like that was like right around the mid-aughts, and maybe this is just because like when we were in high school, like that was like the point at which like busybody Christian parents and like internet atheism like kind of like we're at like the tipping point, if that makes sense.
Yeah, this was like the heart of like evolution being taught in schools battles.
Yeah.
In the Bible Belt. Do you know what I mean? So I definitely do feel that. I'm just looking at what some folks said. Constantine, which opts in the end for what I can only describe as a kind of supernatural humanism, is not without its spiritual satisfactions. What is this? One of a kind. I don't know. It has a pretty bad rating. It seems like it does seem to be that it was kind of like panned, but a lot of these reviews are actually kind of like not that bad.
All right, I'm looking at the Rotten Tomatoes. Do they not have an index because it's too old? You do. Keanu Reeves seems to be trapped in the Matrix. Score 2.5 out of 5 from the Times of India.
Yeah, like if you're a fan of the Hellblazer comic series on which the movie is based, you'll definitely need a distraction. The relation between Constantine and his source material is at best superfluous. The disparity starts with the original John Constantine being from Liverpool, England, Reeves from the city of John and Paul, as if what I feel like? I think this is the kind of movie that is fine, but that critics pan because they can. You know what I mean? It's just like there's a lot of stuff coming out. You can't give shitty reviews to everything, and so you just kind of like pick on certain movies. I feel like there's a million of these.
Yeah,
Just like movies that are probably okay. They're really not all that bad, but they walk away with pretty bad, like critical
yeah.
reception, just kind of because like.
Maybe I'm also wrong about like the kind of culture stuff. Maybe this is just simply kind of like, this is before like the MCU is like a thing, and before we have this kind of like a swing to like, should there be a category that the MCU can win at the Oscars, right? Like, which we're also passed again, right? But
Yeah.
like I could see at the time being like, like rejection of this as pablum by every critic who thinks they're the next Roger Ebert, if that makes sense. Which I think might be a little bit unfair to Ebert and Siskel, who I don't think are actually that vaunted. But I think there's kind of like that ideal that like, it's not true cinema, so it's not worthy of a good review type of deal.
Yeah, like there's a lot that I like about Constantine. Mostly the camera work is like weirdly very good. I think the story is actually pretty bad. Like the script is actually pretty bad overall. But like it is really elevated by Keanu Reeves just kind of being himself, and that's fine. The and then just like the lighting and the camera and the mood, it's like this is a Los Angeles that I have kind of never seen before. This like incredibly dark, moody Los Angeles. Do you know what I mean? Compared to like I feel like Los Angeles is typically sunshine, bright lights, big city, right? This was like like Los Angeles as Gotham City, basically.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. But yeah. So we'll get into the details of that later. But needless to say, both of us are positive on it. Like, yeah, I'll agree the story isn't the tightest thing in the world, but I don't care that much about this movie, right? Like, it's not what I'm coming to this movie for. As I was watching this with my girlfriend, as I was lining up to watch this, we had watched Pope's Exorcist, and it was like John Wick with demons is Constantine, so let's watch Constantine. What were your non-spoilery thoughts on Pope's Exorcist, which you should be a little bit more careful
This
on?
movie is wild in the sense of it's basically an action movie. This movie has more in common with the Avengers than it does with The Exorcist, which I think is kind of nuts.
But the thing is the fake out, right? Like the beginning, you think it's gonna be like more like The Exorcist, right? And it changes like
and I have a complicated relationship. I don't know how to like. I wasn't raised in a religious household. I guess I'm functionally like an atheist, but like not in like a militant way or anything like that. Just like my parents, there was no belief structure, there was no church, there's none of that stuff. So I think one of the core fears that The Exorcist stokes is I'm kind of immune to, right? Like even the original Exorcist, which famously was like the scariest movie of all time, people fainted in the theater and stuff like that. And I think that there's a level of that that's just like raw body horror, and that's fine. That's kind of like fair enough. But I think that there's a thing with The Exorcist, which is that thing of this could really happen that just hits me like a magic missile in like a null magic zone. Do you know what I mean? It's just like it doesn't work.
That is interesting because I just by pure coincidence watched the Red Letter Media review of the new Exorcist, which they didn't like, but they talked a little bit about this one. And part of the thing that they saw that was so scary about the first Exorcist is that the mother isn't a particularly devout believer, right? And the scary part is this is a thing that happened that science couldn't explain, right? It's scary because like if it did happen to you, you wouldn't be able to deal with it, right? Like is that like a thing that you would dismiss as impossible is happening, right? Because it's the true of like every horror movie, right? Like it's also not possible that like Freddy Krueger will come and eat me in my dreams, right? Like and the vehicle for that is this Christian esoterica, right? And so like I'm not quite sure where you're going with it, but like I was not raised Catholic. I was raised Protestant, and we don't have a lot of the esoterica type stuff.
You weren't raised Catholic?
No.
Really?
So fun story.
But you're so Italian.
Fun story. I was baptized twice. Once as a Catholic baby. So my dad's family is Catholic. My mom's family is Protestant. Um, and the deal with my paternal grandparents is like, you can raise him Protestant, but you have to have him baptized as a baby. That way, if something terrible happens, he goes to heaven, right? That's the basic belief system, right? Like, the Catholics baptize their babies because if you're unbaptized, you go to purgatory. In the branch of Protestantism that I was raised in, I was baptized at the age of like 9. And the idea is that that's of your own free volition, and you're taking this. It's a symbolic act of taking the spirit into you.
Okay, yeah, this would be equivalent to confirmation in Catholics.
Yeah,
right?
kind of. I'm not super clear on what confirmation is, but like, it's a symbolic thing. I think there's supposed to
Yeah.
be a level of like actual kind of like embracing of the Holy Spirit in it. I think my church did not do a particularly good job of explaining that to me, because I was probably like, if I, looking at it intellectually, if I were to seriously consider a baptism, I would have wanted to do it earlier, where I had a better understanding of what was happening. Um, but that is what it is. No, so point being, I was not raised Catholic, so I am not steeped in the esoterica. I find it super interesting, just because like, um, it's like the Pope's Exorcist is a fictionalized account of a real guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
He might even still be alive. He like retired in 2016. I don't know if that was on his death, or if it was or if he just retired. He but like, like, I do not understand papal politics. But like, Christian esoterica is a thing that at least some part of the Catholic Church embraces as like a real ish thing. To your point, right? Like that, like, the fear of the if the fear being described is like the chance that you could actually be possessed, it's not a thing that like affects you or me, frankly, because it's not a thing that is within our possibility set as a real consequence, right? Is that your point? Primary point?
Yeah, it's like there are things that spook me. I'm bad at horror movies. Horror movies get to me. Are you gonna go see the Five Nights at Freddy's movie?
Probably not, unless you ask me to.
We can do it for the cast. I mean, I have a deep love for Five Nights at Freddy's lore. And so I will be going to see that movie. That movie, I'm sure, is going to get me, right? It 2017, right? The 2017 It movie famously got me really hard. Even though, like, that's a movie that's like about like a supernatural alien thing. You know what I mean? It's like, but there's like this weird thing of it doesn't trigger. Maybe it's like we talked about like suspension of disbelief. Maybe it doesn't trigger my suspension of disbelief in the same way. Um, because like there's something about it can tell me about a shape-shifting alien that like fucks with these kids and eats them, right? And I can buy into that and kind of get immersed in that horror in a way that I cannot get immersed in the horror of there's a demon and a Catholic priest comes to get it out with his crosses. You know what I mean? And I don't know what it is. I always assumed it was because I wasn't religious, but I've never been spooked or scared by that in the same way that like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre gets me, right? Or Midsummer got me. Anyway, but to
That's
wrap it around,
interesting.
The Pope's Exorcist is a horror movie, but it's also an action movie in a weird way, right?
Yeah.
Like it's almost more of a thriller is probably the real thing that I would want to call it. It probably has more in common with a true thriller like a David Fincher movie than it does kind of maybe either. Maybe thriller is just the genre of action plus horror in a way.
Yeah, sorry,
But yeah.
I'm still stuck a little bit on your last thing, just because like, I wonder if it's because like there's not like a huge threat in The Exorcist, right? Like,
Mhm.
I wonder if you'd be scared by like you know, a movie where like it's like a traditional slasher antagonist, but it's a demon instead of a instead of like a Freddy, Jason, that kind of thing. I mean, I guess technically Freddy might count, right? Because like Freddy, I think is theoretically like a pedophile that's like an agent of hell for some reason.
Yeah. Freddy, I haven't watched those movies in a long
Yeah,
time.
neither have I.
I definitely got spooked by like the Halloween movies or whatever. Like occult stuff can get to me. Blair Witch Project, I think, is tremendously frightening. That is a tremendously frightening film. I don't know. What's the movie about going into the catacombs under Paris?
I'm not familiar with this.
Paris. God, what is it called? As Above, So Below is a found footage horror movie about people who go into the catacombs under Paris,
Yeah,
right? Famously, incredibly huge mazes. People get lost in them because it's all pretty kind of like undocumented. And that movie has like a supernatural element that can get to me. The Witch, another that's Ari Aster as well, right? That Midsummer and the Witch is the same guy, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I watched The Witch last year with my girlfriend, and I thought it was meh.
Oh, it's actually not the same guy, but I like The Witch. That's based on like devils and stuff like that. I don't know. Have you ever read the Malleus Maleficarum?
No.
I took a class in college where we had to read the Malleus Maleficarum, which maybe also like I don't know plays into this stuff. The Malleus Maleficarum is the witch hunting like the Inquisitor's Bible,
Okay.
like guidebook from the 1600s or whatever. And so just like I don't know like that stuff. For some reason, The Exorcist, possession movies, Poltergeist would be another good example. I never cared about any of those movies. They just didn't. They don't appeal to me in a horror way in the way that they do with others. Which I don't know. Maybe we'll talk more about that. So anyway,
real quick, I have to address. Lou in the chat says, "I will come for you over the Witch, Mango." I just want to be clear. My issue with the Witch is that, basically none of the protagonists in the film have any control over anything that happens, right? The plot just kind of happens to them. And so I found it unsatisfying, right? It's not like it's like just stuff just I don't know. We talked about this a little bit last year when I watched it, but it's just kind of like stuff just kind of happens. And like that is not satisfying to me. I'm not, yeah, the lack of agency is part of the horror. I get that. The
chat. My problem with The Witch is that it's dog shit. Okay, I'm sorry. It's just funny.
And yeah, no, I get that that's part of the horror. I just don't find it very satisfying as a movie watching experience. But anyway, on to the movies that we are.
I don't know why I find that so funny. Maybe it's the use of the word dog shit, which has become my like pejorative. When something is bad, I call it dog shit recently. Maybe that's like a Sopranos thing. Do they say that in the Sopranos? I don't know.
Anyway,
yeah.
So, spoilers for Constantine and the Pope's Exorcist. Probably be more concerned about the second one than the first one. But yeah. So, what do you want to tackle this in order? Do you have a particular thing you want to call out about either of these movies?
So the thing that appeals to me about these is the mythologizing of it. This is what I find most fascinating. And for a long time, I actually think that Christianity in general has sort of resisted this sort of a reading, which is maybe just like a result of kind of the secularization of, I don't know, like the modern Western world or something kind of along those lines. Because essentially, have you ever read what is the Richard Dawkins book that everybody goes nuts for? The God Delusion, is that what it's called?
Yeah. So I just want to challenge you really quickly on that. I don't think Christianity's resisted that. I think that's like purely internecine conflict, right? Like that, like this is a thing that Protestants don't really believe, but Catholics do, and Catholics were very marginalized for a very long time, right? In the United States especially, right? Like it was a big deal when JFK got elected. It's a big deal to some extent that Joe Biden is a Catholic president, right? Like the fact that it's unremarkable is weird from like like, like a stretch of history perspective, right? Like if
Well, yeah. Okay, so on a stretch of history lens, here's what I would say. I think for most of history, because of the lack of sort of scientific acumen, you get interfaith conflicts, right? Rather than a secular versus faith conflict, right? So for most of history, you have different sects of religion, whether that's, I mean, this movie references Spanish Inquisition, that's
yeah,
Jews and Moors, Muslims. Um, like these are all people of different religions kind of fighting each other, but there really isn't like an atheist strain basically anywhere on the planet, right? That happens kind of out of the, like it's
the
the
Enlightenment.
seed, yeah, comes in the Enlightenment, and then it grows into kind of where we are now, where like atheism and a secular society is pretty normal in a certain
Right.
sort of sense, right? Not atheism in a true like in an atheism isn't kind of like a negative space sense, like an absent sense, right? There is a lot of stuff where religion is absent from people's lives, and this is kind of the first time in history where that sort of thing has happened. And so in my my head, the conflict is now you have people who are a-religious, shall we say, kind of fighting in a culture with people who are religious, whereas before it was two different strains of religion fighting one another, right? Like the Great Awakening in the 1800s would have been an example of this. Does that make sense? That's like a baseline.
Yeah. I was more commenting on kind of like the nature of like Christianity resisting mythologizing. I just like don't think that's generally historically true, right? Like angels and demons like have been a thing. It's just like they became more metaphorical over time, to your point, but it was always like a lot more like real and concrete in the Catholic Church. At least from my understanding of the history of the church, and I am not an expert, but I have done some reading on it. Um, and like I think also part of the resistance to mythologizing of Christianity is straight up, even though we have like pretty strong legal rights to do it, there was a lot of like popular pushback against things that were viewed as blasphemous, essentially, right? Like,
Okay, I think I may be willing to buy that, especially because there's a piece of this that is kind of complicated, which is that the Great Awakening, right? I think technically the Second Great Awakening is what it's called. In like the 60s or 70s. This is when like Mormons, for instance, come out, but there's a
oh,
whole bunch of
like
religious
the
sects, the
revival,
Seventh Day,
yeah,
and
yeah,
yeah. And all of these are about reinterpretations of texts, right? And about like, oh, when is Revelation? What's it gonna, all be like, all that other kind of stuff. Maybe I would buy the argument that that's mythologizing Christianity in this exact same way, and so it's part of this strain. But really, what it comes down to is the idea of using religious sort of stuff as lore for your
right,
story,
right,
right?
right. Like we do
Yeah.
with Norse mythology or
Yes,
Greek
yeah,
mythology,
exactly,
yeah.
right? Weirdly enough, this has also happened in like a number of different places. Like for instance, even something like Diablo is kind of like would be a good example of this, right? Where it's like, it's not true lore. It's not like we're not talking about Yahweh and the and Lucifer, right? And Lucifer's, whatever he's doing is some sort of I don't know.
This isn't the Christian Satan, right?
Right, yeah, but
This
like the
is like
iconography,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. I
And
also
so the part of this movie or the part of these two movies together that I really loved was the amount of like, oh, I recognize this name because it's like a church name. It's like a Christian, it's like a thing, but it's also like you're telling me this is magic, essentially. This is like Gandalf the Grey explaining the One Ring, but it's the version of that where he's talking about, how this one exorcist was actually possessed by Asmodeus the devil, or the king of hell, not the devil, Asmodeus the king of hell, and you manipulated the church into causing the devastation of the Spanish Inquisition, right? That kind of stuff.
yeah. Yeah, no, I get all of that. Also, it is something that the problem in my head is like this is like a tweet I saw like a year or two ago, so take it all with a grain of salt. But like something like somebody like commenting that they had read the Bible and like suddenly so many more like so much like you could see the kind of references all throughout the canon, right? Um and like the be honest, I was a quote to as being like, essentially like the loss of Christianity is kind of like a um shared kind of knowledge base, like in reference base in the Western world had like kind of damaged the ability to interpret and understand the entirety of the Western canon because it is so excuse me rooted in Christianity. It's like a shared cultural touchstone, maybe is the way to put it.
Okay, I want to like red flag that. I want to call bullshit on that kind of, but I do. I guess maybe I would just want to say that Christianity has dog shit lore. Can I say that? Like Warcraft lore based, great. I love it. Christian lore, terrible. So confusing. Doesn't make any sense. Can someone give me the link to the Catholic fandom wiki, please, so that I can learn the lore on Asmodeus? I want to mention this, by the way. The chat, Lou in the chat says, and now we play everyone's favorite game. How do you pronounce that diabolic name? I would say Asmodeus in a normal sense, but in the movie, he is referred to, and Russell Crowe is Italian in this movie. Italians don't have all the same vowel sounds, so he said Asmodeus, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry. I just want to say the Bible has shit lore. That's what it's.
Well, so as Lou points out in the chat, there's no univocality, right? Like it's not
Yeah.
like like Warcraft lore is mostly written by Chris Metzen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Christian lore is written by God, interpreted through like a bunch of different voices. Right?
Yeah, this is what when evangelicals try and convert you. This is something they talk about all the time. They're really mad about the Virgin Mary, right? The Virgin Mary, the Holy Mother, is really important in Catholic lore, but she is really not all that important when it comes to just like the Bible itself. And so evangelical Christians will talk about how, Mary is only mentioned once, and all of the Catholics are so dumb.
Well, that's not just evangelical. Like, I am parsing hairs here, but like evangelical is like generally considered a separate kind of thing from broader or a portion of broader Protestantism. That's like a Protestant versus Catholic thing, right? Like
use it like all Protestants feel that way.
Yeah, well, it's not that. Well, I mean, most Protestants just kind of like don't care about like the Catholic kind of conflict, right? I mean, with some very significant exceptions, right? The Troubles were a thing for a very long time. No offense to the Irish, right? Like,
no. I know what you mean. Like, there's obviously Martin Luther, the 95 Theses, right?
Yeah, like
is one of his theses about the Virgin Mary.
Well, the intercession of the saints and Virgin Mary are like not a thing in Protestantism, right? Like because they are not like at the. This is like a level of theology that we probably don't need to go into to talk about.
Honestly, what I feel like I'm doing the like rhetorical equivalent of being a little kid smashing around in the garden and like stomping on all the plants, and Mango's like, "Oh, don't touch that! Oh God, can we please?" So what I'm talking about.
Yeah, Orion says in the chat, all Protestants feel that way. Boy, don't ever say that about yeah. There's like an old joke that's like like two guys and like they it's like, oh, are you a member of what are you, Catholic or a Protestant? Oh, I'm a Protestant. Oh, are you a member of like Episcopalianism or like Baptist? Oh, I'm a Baptist. Oh, are you Northern Conference or Southern Conference? Oh, I'm Northern Conference. Are you Reformed Church or Orthodox Church? I'm Reformed. Die heretic, right? Like like that's
honestly, I don't even. I guess I know Episcopalian, Presbyterian, Lutheran. I don't know what are the other Catholic strains like.
Well, those are Protestant strains. Like,
oh, I'm sorry, Protestant strains. Yeah,
I mean, so there's non-denominational, which is a denomination. Don't believe like there's baptism and like so my church nominally or growing up nominally was Conservative Baptist. It functioned more like non-denominational. Which is
different than Southern Baptist because they get to be racist. So right. That was my understanding of Southern Baptist.
It depends. Like this is a thing. This is territory that I shouldn't wade into because my understanding was that there is a there is a strain of baptism that is primarily African American. There's also like Pentecostal and like there's like there are more Protestant denominations than like than you can name on fingers, right? The big kind of deviations are like the Mennonites, who are like various forms of Amish, right? The Episcopalians, because they are Anglicans, they're American Anglicans, and Anglicans are Catholics that the King of England split off so he could divorce his wife, not because there was actually a theological division. Um, what was the and then there's like kind of like a mush of other Protestantism that like kind of like also churches don't stay constant, right, throughout through everything. And that's not even like talking about like the Eastern Church, right? Like Eastern Orthodox.
Yeah, oh yeah, like Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, right?
Yeah. And then like there's also like the Asian churches, which are their own thing. You know what? Let's shelf talking about the intricacies of
whatever the case may be. Yeah. Both of these movies deal a lot with lore, like Christian lore.
Yes.
Which is the thing that I think is interesting, right?
Yes.
And they are both nominally focused on exorcists, but I guess very different sort of spirits in their exorcism. Like John Constantine is a movie about exorcism that is fundamentally a superhero action movie, right? Whereas the Pope's Exorcist is more like a mystery, I guess, in a way, which is kind of where it comes to that like thriller angle, right? There's this church, there's this abbey in Spain, and it's got a whole bunch of dead, I guess they were Jews. The Spanish Inquisition killed Jews and Moors, right? That death brought a demon, and the demon is the king of hell, and his name is Asmodeus, and he couldn't be exorcised, and so he's like locked there or whatever stuff going on. I thought all of that was pretty interesting, right? Kind of in like a like a Paradise Lost sort of way, where it's just like people interpreting biblical history narratively, I think is really interesting and fun.
Because you actually the part this is a big spoiler, is that the exorcist that was locked in the basement, like the implication is the Spanish Inquisition happens because he's possessed by Asmodeus, and so he drives him to commit these heinous crimes against humanity, right? Because like part of the Inquisition, I think, was like historically it's Jews and Moors, but I don't know how true this is real life, but I think the implication in the movie is that like there are a lot of like also just like generally innocent people, right? Like that were just like put to the test, right? In a kind of like a Salem witch trials kind of way. Just like kind of like people who are suspected of being Jews and Moors, even if they weren't. Not that it's not horrible, regardless, but like at least in kind of like the tradition, there are people that aren't even like guilty of the things they're being charged with.
This is sort of the overlap with the Malleus Maleficarum, right? Which, to be fair, the Malleus Maleficarum was a German book, like written by some German guy. But it has that same sort of thing, right? Of like of demonology and how do demons possess people and all this other, excuse me, and how does all this other sort of stuff. But instead of going for demons, it's going kind of around witchcraft, because the idea is mostly the misogynistic, right? That women are not possessed by demons, but entering into, profane marriages with them and that kind of thing.
Yeah. No, there's the whole American side of it is also super interesting, because like a lot of it was like people just accusing people, right? Like for fun. But not for fun, but like like there's just a lot of stuff with like kids who were just kind of like probably didn't know any better, but were like just like doing it because they could. But I agree with you. It's an interesting aspect of this movie, and contrast with Constantine, right? Constantine is a medium, right? Like he is a person gifted with powers to like from birth to be able to like interact with this world, whereas like kind of the fundamental difference. It's kind of like Batman versus Superman, weirdly, right? Like Constantine is Superman, right? Because he's like born with these powers, whereas like the Pope's exorcist, Father Amorth,
Yeah.
does it is all based on like study and piousness, right? Which is like,
Yeah.
you know, he is a normal human but for his piousness, right? Like Batman is a normal human but for his training and his detective work, right? Um, uh, so it is kind of like an interesting way of like dealing with it separately because, right, like I guess John Wick has, or not John Wick. I'm going to keep calling him John Wick. Constantine has this kind of like level of gadgets as well, and like it kind of like it's like fan service esoterica, right? Like, you know, I got like this screeching bug from like this grave site, right? Like that's a plot device, right? I think it's supposed to be like it's an Amityville bug or something, right? It's like a reference to another horror movie. And it's like, oh, this is like a fun little magic thing, right? Whereas like the items in the Pope's Exorcist are not like they're not magical items in kind of like you know pew pew blasty type of way, right? They're just kind of like they're items that have like spiritual weight to them and are like not obviously magical, right? They're just kind of like objects of faith, which is
Yeah, there is a part of Constantine where they're talking with that guy. He eventually gets eaten by bugs or whatever. Um, but he almost has this moment of like Q from James Bond,
yeah,
where he shows up with all these gadgets, but like they're magical religious gadgets, not technological gadgets. That are all planting and payoff, right? They will eventually be paid off over the course of the movie, and then also obviously it's not quite the MacGuffin. It's like kind of the MacGuffin. The Spear of Destiny, right?
yeah,
Is an important piece of sort of Christian mythology. The spear that pierced, because when Jesus is up on the cross, he gets stabbed with a spear. That spear is covered in his blood, and the idea is that this spear became like this crazy magical artifact afterwards. The Spear of Destiny, funnily enough, gets referenced in comics lore. The reason that it pops up in Constantine is because it pops up in comics lore as the reason that Superman did not kill Hitler. Because Hitler, through his weird occult stuff, found the Spear of Destiny and used it to sanctify Nazi land, and in doing so kept American superheroes from directly killing him, basically, like him and the Nazis. They could fight on like the front lines, but Superman can't just fly to Berlin and like heat vision Hitler or whatever, which I always thought was the craziest bit of lore, but it's
wait,
real. It's a real thing.
say that again, sorry.
Okay, so here's the thing. Superman, this is a purely lore invented to solve a problem. The Justice Society of America exists. You need to explain why Superman, and later other heroes, right, doesn't fly to Germany and kill Hitler, laser vision Hitler, right, or Wonder Woman, or any of these other superheroes who could do such a thing, right? And the answer was that Hitler had found the Spear of Destiny and used it to sanctify Nazi territory, so that the superheroes could not invade. Like, you could win with conventional warfare, but you could not fly in like Wonder Woman can't fly through Nazi territory and do stuff, which is why they were allowed to fight on the front lines, which was the thing that happened in like Justice Society comics. But you can't fight, but you can't just like the Flash cannot just zip to Berlin and shoot and shoot Hitler with a gun.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, hold on 1 second. Sorry, this is the reason why I haven't been paying attention. I think recently was there was like I saw, this is another thing I saw on Twitter, that recently there was like a feast day for the guy who stabbed Jesus.
What?
Like, so many of the people in the Christian story are beatified and sanctified by the Catholic Church. This is another kind of like Protestants on Twitter are like, look at these silly Catholics beatifying the guy who killed Jesus, right? Like, Yeah, his feast day is 16. It's today. Today is the feast day of Longinus. Um,
Longinus.
in
Okay.
Roman
I thought it was Pontius
martyrology.
Pilate. I guess Pontius Pilate ordered it, right?
Yeah, yeah. Longinus is the guy who. This is why it took me a little while to find, because I thought it was Pilate too. Pilate's, I think, the governor at the time of Jerusalem at the time, and Longinus is the guy who literally stabs him. Um, yeah. Uh,
Oh my god. Wow, this actually makes so much sense. Because the spear of Longinus is a thing from Evangelion. I didn't know this was a Christian. Uh wow, yeah. Look at that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, Lou points out in the chat. It's called the Spear of Longinus. We even call it the Spear of Destiny. I wonder if that's like a Spear of Destiny versus Spear of Longinus. The same thing.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
it's the
it's
same.
just
They're all
another
the
name
same
for it.
thing. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Man. Oh, okay, never mind. Yeah, but to your point, like, just to kind of get a little bit back on track, since we've been like kind of
I'm
meandering.
sorry. I'm rampaging around this
Yeah.
this podcast.
Just because we've been, it's interesting just to because like, to your point, engaging with Christian mythology as Christian mythology is relatively rare, right?
Yeah.
Like, but engaging with Christian mythology as kind of like touchstones otherwise, right? Isn't, like you said, Diablo, like, you know, D&D, right? There are angels, there are demons, there are devils, there are demons, which is like a purely, like, that's not a distinction. I think it's not a biblical distinction. That is
Oh yeah, and there's the thing because in D&D you have demons who are purely forces of chaos. You have devils who are very tightly ordered. They're 9 circles of hell, right?
yeah.
This is very Paradise Lost. And then you have daemons who are the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, right?
Yeah,
Like demons. You have pestilence, you have war, and all that other stuff.
yeah, I think those are the like the heads of it. But like, demons are neutral evil, demons are chaotic evil, devils are lawful evil. Um, yeah. And like
Yeah.
this kind of like permeates everything, right? Like, hell, like the New Jersey Devils are like ostensibly named after the Jersey Devil, but like the iconography is all like classic kind of like cartoon Satan, right? Like,
Mhm.
um, yeah, um, yeah, which is
Do you want to watch more of the Pope's Exorcist movies if they were to make more of these?
oh, I absolutely would. I thought it was super fun. Um, honestly, like, so the one that you didn't watch, which is 30 Coins, is pretty janky, is the way I'll put it. Because I don't want to say it's terrible, but like, me and my girlfriend watched the first episode and we're like, this is silly, this is dumb. Like, the main character is the mayor of the town. I think his name is Paco, and he is like the dumbest himbo of like all time. Um, there's like the main female character is this like veterinarian who like her husband disappeared and no one knows where he went, and like um Paco's wife is like this shrewish woman, and like they're sitting in bed and Paco is just like shirtless in bed, like buff, like trying to type on his computer, and he's so dumb. It is such a dumb show. But like, it's, and like the Exorcist character is this priest who, very similar to this kind of movie, um has like a person in his past who he like didn't believe was actually possessed, and he ends up dying, which is kind of like an inverse of this movie, where like, Pope's Exorcist doesn't believe that this person is possessed, but like turns out like the point is that doesn't matter. You show compassion regardless, right? Like, this is why he goes and he does, like, he gets in trouble at the beginning of the movie because he does a fake exorcism in an attempt to help the mental health of this teenage boy or young man. I can't quite tell. Is because, when essentially, I can't remember if this is from the show or from the movie. It's like, when you don't know what's happening, right? Like, and your mother's very religious, she calls for a priest, right? And like, if she won't bring you to a doctor, then like, I've got to do what I've got to do to make sure you're helped, because otherwise, you know, like because the consequences could be disastrous even if it isn't, you know, you know, even if it isn't Satan involved, right? Which is the point about the in the movie. He fails to help this young woman and she commits suicide, which you know is not only a terrible thing but also as John Constantine points out, is a mortal sin, and that has another level of consequence, I think, for like for the Catholic viewer, um, which is interesting. That is honestly the only kind of thing that really bothered me about the Esoterica of John Wick. Is like, you know, it's like, I guess I could make the case for John Constantine being like not actually like part of the deal with Christianity, right, is that like faith is important, and it is not an act of faith to believe in something that you know is true, I guess. And so like John Constantine trying to like make up for his attempted suicide by works rather than faith, like that's also really, so I actually don't know what the state of this is in the Catholic Church, but like one of kind of the tenets of at least the branch of Christianity that I was brought up in is like, you know, by faith not works. So like, you know, like the idea as the movie goes into that you can buy your way into heaven is kind of like, you know, a non-starter, right? Like, you know, but and so like, I don't know, it just like that whole dynamic was weird to me. It's like he commits suicide, and so he can't ever get back into heaven, I guess. Although Gabriel hints that like if he actually believed, maybe he could, but then he does by like sacrificing himself.
Yeah, that whole piece didn't make any sense to me. But I just kind of didn't. I just kind of rolled with it at that point.
Yeah, no, I mean it's very
honestly the logic of he killed himself, but then he gets resuscitated is the thing that happens, right? So
yeah.
he's sort of like, I'm like, excuse me, like then you're not dead, buddy. Like I don't think that fucking Saint Peter is gonna be like persecuting people for that at the pearly gates. Do you know what I mean? It's like if you got brought back, then you never entered heaven, right? That's like that's gotta be lore.
Yeah, I mean, so like there's a big part of sin that is like intentionality, right? And so like I do not know what the like, because the idea of a mortal sin is also a very Catholic thing, as like, you know, like levels of sin are not a thing in the Protestant church, or at least in most of them, yada yada yada, right? And so like the concept that you tried to kill yourself and you failed, and like part of the mortal sin bit is like, you know, you do it fully intentionally, right? Like and so like that I get, but like if you got brought back, the way you traditionally cure that kind of like sin is you go confess, right? You go to confession. Yeah. Which we get a very nice scene of in the Pope's Exorcist, right? Like I actually thought that scene was like, you know, my church didn't do confession. I've never done confession, but I thought that scene was super interesting, a super cool way to kind of like get to like, that's like a very nice device for like doing a flashback, right? It's like go like confess right now, right? Like do the confession. That's an interesting story tool, I guess.
I have been thinking a lot about that recently, for completely unrelated reasons. Maybe we can talk about this in the back half or whatever. About sort of like because The Sopranos is about Tony Soprano going to a therapist, right? And there's a lot of stuff about him being Catholic. His wife is super Catholic. She goes to confession. She talks to a priest a lot. She gets a lot of advice from a priest. And there's like a big thing about like, there's a big thing about how in the tradition of sort of their culture, Tony is doing the wrong thing by going to a therapist, right? And Carmela is doing the right thing by going to a priest, essentially. Even though they're both trying to give feedback, but that the show takes the side of it's like a weirdly like pro like secular sort of interpretation, because Dr. Melfi, Tony's therapist, is definitively correct about basically everything that she says on the show. Not to say that she is like correct in the sense of like a moral arbiter, but in the sense of she properly, you know, demystifies kind of the psychology that is happening underneath these characters, right? And then fucking Carmela Soprano will go to the priest, and the priest would be like, Carmela, it's a sin to divorce your husband, right? Like,
Yeah.
and it's just like the worst possible advice.
No, because that's interesting, because that is like this, kind of like secular religious conflict that you're talking about, right? Because like I think you can make a pretty strong argument that like the function of the priest was like to be the town's therapist for a long time, because like psychiatrists weren't a thing for a very, very long time.
Yeah,
right?
well, this is also why when I was talking about the Great Awakening, so many of those sects pop up, right? And a lot of the like one of the crazy things about our world, we've only had germ theory and modern understandings of illness, bacteria, viruses, right? For like the last maybe call it like 150 years, right? Probably cholera in the 1870s in London is really where we start to understand this stuff, because somebody figures out that you don't want to poop near the well water, right?
Yeah.
And so you have people who are making wild claims about how and why illnesses are striking people, right? And that's something that fuels that's something that fuels in a really complex way people's innate desire for closure. This is what the God delusion is about, right? This is Richard Dawkins, and he's explaining why people invent religion. It's because the human mind, it's like that circle thing that we talked about before, right? People invent conspiracy theories for the same reason. It's the much worse version of, I guess, religion is the point I'm making. But it's the same psychological process. People want to find closure. They want to understand a thing completely. They dislike it when it doesn't make sense, and it is like incomprehensible. And the religion and God, and religion and God were really, really useful tools to explain these things over the course of human history, right? Lightning is not, a difference in the temperature and the charge of particles in the air between the higher and lower, pieces of the atmosphere. It is a guy who is throwing these thunderbolts from a mountain that's really tall, right? Like that kind of thing. Yeah, Zeus did it. Yeah. The angels are bowling. What does that mean?
That's I think a euphemism for thunder.
That's a euphemism for thunder? People said that?
People probably still say it.
This is ridiculous. That's all I can say. This is
you never heard of it? Like, so I don't know if it's like official doctrine that thunder is angels bowling. I think that's mostly just like a metaphor, right? Like,
teach me the lore. Okay, the angels bowling. That you got taught that. Your mom taught you that? Did you believe her? Sorry, this is Arahi in the chat. I'm talking to Arahi in the chat.
Yeah, but like that's also like that's like a Santa Claus type thing, right? This is not like I'm sure this is not like official doctrine. I'm sure Arahi's mother was not like, this is a scientific explanation for why thunder happens. This is your kid is scared and you need to calm them down. Yeah. If your kid is scared of thunder, you say, don't be scared. It's just the angels bowling. Right. Yeah. Right. Like
that is wild to me. Okay.
Did your parents never comfort you, buddy? Are we?
But my dad just told me what thunder was. I just knew what thunder was.
Your dad dispelled your fear with facts and logic.
I guess so. What do you fucking want from me? It's not that it was facts and logic. It's that the idea that I don't know. He explained the thing that he explained. I remember that was useful was that thunder does not come top down. It goes bottom up, right? That a lightning bolt is technically like the charge is actually getting dissipated up into the atmosphere, even if we think of it as striking down, or whatever. And I remember thinking of that as being a thing. But yeah, I guess I don't know. Honestly, that checks out. Knowing Buddy said, yeah, I guess okay. 2-year-old Buddy getting a scientific explanation of thunder and how it relates to lightning. What do you guys want from me? Okay.
And Buddy went to sleep and was like, "Ah, I understand this booming noise. It is not.
I you
It
know
is not scary, for it is just like a sonic boom."
It's funny because I have a lot of like dumb fears. Like I have a real fear. This is part of my obsession with like like doomed boats, right? I have like a real fear of like the doomed boat thing happening, or like my plane, like the idea of a plane is so frightening, and I had a weird anxiety inducing experience on a plane once that just like fucked me up in a weird way or whatever. But the thing that is soothing is knowing the probability that plane accidents are so incredibly rare, right? That planes are so insanely safe that most pilots will do hundreds, I mean thousands over the course of their lifetime, like plane trips, and never have a thing happen. It's because something I used to think about this all the time. How come there are so many more car accidents than plane accidents? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I
Have
guess.
Have you ever been in a car where the engine has failed
Uh,
or like the brakes have fucked up?
I don't think so. Um,
It is a truly terrifying experience,
so
but in a way of like, yeah.
I got one. I was driving once in a rainy day and my car 180'd on the highway. Like as I was turning onto it. It wasn't a problem, but yes, I understand exactly what you mean.
Yeah. Like I was once driving on a highway in Los Angeles during rush hour and my timing belt snapped. Which meant that my engine failed, right? I wasn't actually driving. And never in my life have I been more terrified in a car because it's the loss of control that's so frightening, right? Because you realize, "Oh my God, I am in a box hurtling at 60, 70 miles an hour down a highway, and now I have no control." I mean, I do have control. I have control of the steering wheel, obviously, and like the brakes. I can do that. But I can't keep up with traffic. I have to find a way. And I did figure that out, and I was fine. I was safe or whatever. But it's just like, when you think about that, it's like, why doesn't that happen with planes? What happens when a timing belt in a plane snaps? Do we just die? Do we just all die? Right? The answer is yeah. But the other answer is that problems in planes like this have like insane redundancy, and also you basically take your plane to your mechanic every single time it lands and every single time it takes off. So it's just like insanely rare that this stuff pops up. But anyway,
Yeah.
the point is, I don't know, spooky shit. What do you want from me guys?
So I'm curious. Did you believe in Santa when you were a child?
Yeah, I believed in Santa. But I had a couple of things about Santa, and I eventually got demystified. I was probably like 4 or 5 when I figured out that Santa wasn't real. Um, Part of it is also just like the cute little nudge of my family. Like we have a thing called the rhinoceros in the basement, which is just like typically my family doesn't do too many like individual gifts. Everybody kind of gets a couple of small gifts that are small, not super huge, not super crazy, right? But then there is one big gift and it's for the whole family, right? So it's like I will get a toy and then the family gets a ping pong table or something, right?
Okay.
And the big gift is always in the basement, but my dad puts up a sign that says, kids, you can't go into the basement yet. There's a rhinoceros in the basement. Obviously, there's not a fucking rhinoceros in the basement, but it's like a cutesy thing. It was around then that I figured out that Santa was.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. No, I was just curious because, like, obviously, like, Angels Bowling and Santa are kind of like one and the same to me, right? Like, small lies you tell your child, as like behavior reinforcement and or kind of like comforting, right? Like, German Lutheran Santa didn't come overnight. He came when we went to the evening service at church. That's interesting. My mom told us it was to make Santa's job easier because he had so many people to see while they were sleeping. Yeah, no, that's, I don't know. There's obviously there are tons of different traditions there, right? Like, but that is that's
We've done such a poor job of talking about these movies.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
But you know what? It's fine because we are talking about Christian Esoterica, I guess.
Yeah.
By the way, for the chat, I didn't believe that the rhino was in the basement. I knew the rhino was in the basement, wasn't real, and it was an extension of the rhino in the basement. Not real. It got me to realize this. And also, I'm pretty sure my sister told me, and was like, Santa's not real. I remember there being some stuff about how you can't stay up to see Santa or else he won't bring presents, right? So there was kind of this perceived thing. Don't perceive me is what Santa says, right? And that was the realest I ever believed in Santa, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, pretty clearly, like, that and all of the extended mythology around Santa is, like, a vague, like, behavior reinforcement mechanism, right? Like, be good or Santa will bring you coal, right? Like, um, uh, you know, go to sleep because otherwise Santa won't come and you won't get your presents. And I would like to sleep, please. This is my one day off of the, of the year. Let me fucking sleep. Don't you fucking wake me
when
up at
did
8
you
a.m.
learn that Santa wasn't real?
I feel like I resisted being converted for a long time, but like, it was probably in elementary school sometime. Like I know that like my first hint of it was like somebody else at school told me, right? Like also, it gets hairy pretty quickly. It's like, why doesn't Santa visit Jewish children? Right?
It's a thinker.
Yeah. Or like,
yeah, I mean,
or
because
like,
another interesting piece of it is Christian mythology. Like, I remember thinking when I saw movies and TV shows about Santa, right? So the Santa Claus, the Tim Allen movie, I must have seen that when I was a kid. That was the 90s, right? I remember not believing in Santa, but engaging with that on the mythological level, right? Oh, I understand. This is like the lore. This is maybe one of the first instances of the lore of Santa or something like that. But I don't know. I can't think of a time when like I engaged with a piece of Christmas media, even like a kids show that referenced Santa, and I was an earnest believer in Santa at that.
yeah, okay. The only thing I can remember, and I'm sure I did before it, was the Grinch, and that was because, and like the reason I remember engaging in this is because like when my dad would read me the Grinch, he would like editorialize the end of it to put in a part about Jesus, right? Like, yeah,
Oh my god!
yeah.
Wow.
I mean, and like I couldn't tell, I couldn't read, right? I was a tiny child, right? But like it's an important part of like it was important to my parents to transmit their faith, and obviously that was less successful than they would have liked.
You know what is weird? Okay, hold on. I said I didn't have a religious upbringing, which is true, but I was in a Christmas pageant. I was Joseph in a Christmas pageant
Did you
because
have the
my
beard
dad.
then?
Yeah, well, yeah. That's when I grabbed my beard. Yeah, because there was this whole thing about my dad. Funnily enough, they lived in Randolph. Actually, thinking about it, my dad's best friend, for a long time was this guy named Tom Jarling. And his parents, Walter and Maggie Jarling, who I guess I remember for some reason, were members of a church, and they needed people to fill out their Christmas pageant. So I guess auditioned as like a little kid, and I was Jesus for the Christmas pageant.
Very cool.
Yeah. No, not Jesus. I'm sorry, Joseph.
Joseph. Yeah, I
For
would
the
say
Christmas
Jesus
pageant.
would be a little bit rough.
My little sister was Jesus. She was 1 year old at the time.
Okay,
Or
that
I'm sorry,
makes
she was
sense.
she had just been born at the time. She was born in September and was baby Jesus in December of that year. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, I mean, we've talked briefly about kind of like the standard kind of like death of third places type stuff, right? Like,
Yeah.
and church is one of those, right? Like, as people secularize, there's less.
Angels bowling alone in heaven. Oh Christ. Okay, I guess do you want to say anything more about these movies?
I don't
These
know.
TV shows? I'm sorry.
The movies
I
are
was like
fun.
the worst co-host for this episode.
Yeah, I mean, but
Constantly derail the conversation every which way.
to be fair, most of the joy of both of these movies is watching the action happen, right? Like, so if you're interested, go watch these movies. There is some Christian esoterica in it. You don't need to understand it, right? Even the Pope's Exorcist, which is like very Catholic, you can follow along. You don't need to know the history. They explain all of like kind of the basics, right? Like,
Oh, there's one other piece of this that I wanted to mention, which is Dan Brown books. Do you ever read Da Vinci Code or the other one? Angels and Demons?
No, I did read Left Behind though, the kids series. Oh, do you not know about Left Behind?
The fuck is Left
Left
Behind?
Behind was a
Damn,
super popular. Like I read the kids spinoff. It was a super popular book series about the about Revelation, about the second coming. It's a bunch of
oh
people who
my
are left
God.
behind after the what's the term for it? When
The Rapture.
The Rapture, yes.
Have I ever told you about The Last Exodus?
Um,
It's a tabletop game. Hold on. I actually hold on, just one second.
oh, you know what? I think you did tell me. You have spoken about this, but feel free to recap. Yes, Lou. It is about the Rapture, or it's post Rapture. It is post Rapture people who convert, and then like the Antichrist is like a Romanian guy. That I remember he was Romanian because that was the first time I had heard of Romania. Was like,
yeah. So this is The Last Exodus, and I actually don't think my name is in. But is there credits? But like, this is a thing of like Christian esoterica. Like for instance, this is, you can see the for these are for people on the go watch the YouTube video if you want to understand what we're seeing. But this is basically these are the different like.
Is that a Klansman?
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah. So okay. So the lore of The Last Exodus, which is great. I love this lore. They started from the premise of everything religious, okay? All religions are true, okay? And they figured out a way to explain literally everything all in the same kind of like building structure. And the idea behind The Last Exodus is the rapture happens, but the rapture doesn't happen in the way that people think, because people have mortal coils and they have souls, and there's kind of two dimensions, right, that you can like zop between or whatever. The rapture is an ongoing process. This is what the last Exodus refers to. The last Exodus is people who are essentially getting raptured into heaven. But there is heaven, and there are heavens, and there are hells. There are multiple of them, and they correspond to real world places. There's all this like crazy lore. Like for instance, Camelot is the heaven that is on top of the United Kingdom, right? So if you change from Earth to whatever they call I can't remember what they call like the outer planes, you go to Camelot, and like King Arthur is there, and he's like a guy. He's like a real guy who like leads this section of heaven. But then there are hells, right? So the hells are places like Las Vegas is a hell in kind of like a Slanesh, like den of sin and pleasure sort of way, right? So if you go to Las Vegas and you swap between, our world and the other world, you show up in a hell. Anyway, there are two factions. There's the kind of angel faction, and there is the there's the angel faction, and there is like the demon faction. And they have a bunch of different kind of clans, kind of like races in like World of Warcraft, right? Like orcs are part of the Horde, humans are part of the Alliance. So there is a faction for the bad guys who are called the Horde. And that is this that I just happen to open the random page to. And you can see there's a neo-Nazi there. There's a, I guess like an Islamic extremist. Is that second one? There's a Klansman. And these are people who are like motivated by like bigotry and hate. Whereas the second page are the Sanhedrin, which is like the angel version of that, right? Like the deified like version. Anyway, this shit is crazy. Go look it up. It's cool. The Last Exodus. Fucking, that's the last thing I just want to like say about all this.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. The only thing the last thing I want to say about the Pope's Exorcist is just, it starts out kind of in this frame where like, you're kind of like, you're not sure if they're going to be like, if this is going to be like a, ambiguous whether or not it's real or not. And then very quickly they like throws a man into a cabinet, right? And there's also like a gas leak. So I'm like, oh, is it going to be a gas leak? And then they like very pointedly point the camera at the broken dresser to show you that, yes, it's real. Yes, it's all happening. And then the craziest thing is at the end of it, it basically turns into a pitch for a television show because it's like there's 199 other fallen angels, and then like old exorcist and like young Spanish priest team up to like go take them on or something. It was
You know what I wish we had watched for this now that I think about it was The Conjuring. Have you ever watched the Conjuring movies?
no.
Series? Yeah, because those are also based on like exorcists or whatever, but it's based on it's all more complicated than that. Like Annabelle the doll, one of the things in Conjuring. Who are these like I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's what they're going for. They're kind of chasing that Conjuring. You have your main character, he shows up in a serial. You use the word serial, which is the correct use for it. Why is that an interesting use of the word Sanhedrin?
As we wait with bated breath.
Oh, you know what it is? I think I actually remember what it is. The Sanhedrin, I think, is the overall faction. I was trying to before. The Horde is one of the sub factions of the Sanhedrin. I'm pretty sure.
The Sanhedrin were a bunch of rabbis.
They were the Israelite court way back. Interesting. Yeah, and so the other version of it is the apostate, I guess. So the apostate are good guys. The Sanhedrin are bad guys.
Aren't apostates like people who like don't believe in the right version of like they don't believe the right lore. Apostate person who renounces a religious or political belief or principle. Yeah, that is interesting.
Last Exodus, weird book. Highly recommend. I think you can still get it on Drive Through RPG. It used to be out of print, but then I found it in print in college. I bought a copy. That's some anti-Semite shit there. I mean, listen, there's a lot of. This is probably not a very politically correct book because I'm sure it is appropriating just an absolute shit ton of different, like pieces of religious iconography and culture.
Oh, you know what's interesting? I was like, I have heard The Last Exodus before. Not only is it a game on Steam, but it's a trilogy by Paul Tassi, the Forbes writer.
Paul Tassi? When did he write it? He's got to be after this, but like, not that it would ever matter, right?
I mean, yeah. I mean, it's clearly like it's the last. I'm surprised there are not more things called The Last Exodus.
Yeah, published in 2015. Well, okay. Anyway, how's your week? Are we talking about our weeks? I'm sorry.
yeah. Let's talk about our weeks. My week was good. What did I do this week? I beat Baldur's Gate. Finally, I made a big push to do that. It's a good game. Do we want to do a full episode about the wrap up of that? Maybe.
Oh God, that's a good question. I want to ask a million questions about your wrap up, but maybe it would be good for just a full episode to talk about like final true spoilers through to the end.
Yeah. Let's do that. Let's save it. I booted up Cyberpunk, and like made a character, but I didn't get much further than that because I just had other distractions. I continued watching Taskmaster as it comes out, which has been super fun. Played a little bit of what's it called? Of Estrella, and you got this little thing.
Oh yeah, fuck! Oh my God, did I get mine? I hope I got
mine came in the mail today, actually. So it might be this is this is like an official product. Yeah, this is like
we call them standees. I think is what they are. Is what they are called.
I might have put the dice in the wrong position, but I want Solarius up front, so I do not care. It is very cute. I recommend it, especially if you're a big fan of Solarius like I am. I played a couple of rounds. I have not done as well as I did initially, just because I have been more focused on just having fun with the characters. I went for a crazy kind of hurt myself, do more damage, and power build. And then like I got to the point where like I like took a damage and like I took the one that like gives agony to another person, and like I lasted a turn against the final boss, and like one damage like did all my health bar. So it's just like I guess I'm fucked at this point, but that's okay. Um, but you know, it's a fun. Obviously, it's a very fun game.
I did beat Estrella recently on Anomaly 6. Have you how hard have you climbed in the Anomaly?
Oh, I'm not super far. I'm on Anomaly 2, I think.
Okay, I'm on Anomaly 7. There are two anomalies. There's the Estrella's Heart anomaly, which is the boss zone anomaly, and then there's the normal anomaly, which is just like regular enemies going up to the boss. The regular enemies anomaly, I think I'm up to 7, and I just got to 8. But I had gotten all the way up to Anomaly 6 for Estrella, which is really tough. But I was able to beat it with an exceedingly gross Astra build that was just an intense amount of fun. It was have you ever played the Meteor Rain Astra build? Where you just like get a bunch of Meteor Rain stuff and
which one is Astra the Moth?
Astra is the Moth. Meteor Rain is it deals 1 corruption to random targets a number of times. And there is a move called Sky Piercer that says every time you use Meteor Rain, you deal you deal your Meteor Rain, and then you just shoot a bunch of 1 or equal the number of Sky Piercer. If you have Sky Piercer 6, you do 6 to random enemies. But I got this incredible combination of the electrostatic field, which like locks in your homing stuff, and a ton of meteor rain, and one thing that says when you use meteor rain, it's like meteor rain 7, meteor rain 8, 9, but it gives it puts serenity on the target. And then one other thing was the star blessing that says whenever you deal corruption to an enemy, that enemy takes 5 purification. So I basically nuked Estrella in 2 turns and just completely like destroyed my own health bar doing this, by the way. But I just nuked Estrella in 2 turns by electrostatic fielding Estrella and then meteor-raining Estrella for like 40. But like meteor-raining 40 times is 200 times with purification, and you're stacking up serenity and doing all this other stuff at the same time, which was very fun. So I have technically beaten the hardest version of Estrella the boss, even if I have not beaten the hardest version of Estrella the game. I'm still walking up the front end anomalies in order to get there.
Fair enough. What else? Oh, there was another thing I wanted to mention, which is have you heard of Power Washer Simulator?
Yeah, it's published by Square Enix, but everybody calls it an indie game, and it bothers me.
Really? Okay, interesting. Well, I didn't play that. I bought a real power washer, and I've been power washing my deck, which is so fucking satisfying. You know, I'm like charging straight into middle age, but like, you know, I spent like a good like 4 hours over the past week just like getting all the nooks and crannies on my deck with my new Sun Joe power washer.
You know, what is the podcast for if not moments like this? Okay.
Yeah, no, it was Prime week was last week, and I bought a bunch of like tools and stuff, and that was like one of the things out of there. It's just like, oh, I'm gonna get a power, like, you know, my
Prime week was last week, I guess. Yeah, I bought a new keyboard.
Oh, nice.
Because my old keyboard, honestly, I want to say it was broken. To be fair, it probably wasn't broken. It's just that for the space bar, the S, A, like D and E keys, it was sticking. The switch was sticking, and it was the most frustrating thing. I was constantly writing stuff, and I would get like 3 S's or 2 spaces in a row, and I was just like, all right, it's mildly broken, fuck it, like I quit, you know, and I just bought a new one because I've had that keyboard for 6 years at this point.
Do you use mechanical or do you use soft cap or
I
gel
use
cap?
mechanical.
Okay.
I use I have blue RGB blue switches.
Cherry blues. Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, cherry. What did I say? RGB.
Yeah.
RGB is the key. I have an RGB keyboard, but
Okay.
I cherry switches. I use cherry switches.
Yeah.
Cherry blue switches.
Yeah, MX blues. Yeah. No,
6 years never cleaned. Excuse you. I cleaned that keyboard on 2 occasions, and it took a million years.
Yeah. I'm actually at the point where I should probably clean this one, my Ducky Shine 6, and I probably should clean my Moonlander too.
Yeah, honestly, it's a Corsair one. The thing I like about this keyboard is it has like little grippies. Key. My other one, the keys were all aluminum. This one, the keycaps are, I don't know, maybe they're vinyl or something, like some sort of plastic, but maybe they're aluminum, to be honest. I actually don't know. But on the top, they have like a little like traction pad, and I love it. I'm in love with this keyboard.
Yeah, I mean, you could switch out your keycaps too. That's like the one of the easier things to do.
Yeah, that's true.
Like I have, this is gonna be embarrassing because this is kind of dirty. Mine has like, I've got metal keycaps for the arrow keys, but I've mixed and matched. Like these are half size keys that came with the board, and these are clear keys that I put on the board. Like, you know, this is like my first foray into it. I used to have
what is the colors? Is it just random?
Oh yeah. This is like a raindrop effect, because this is a Ducky keyboard. It is all on the hardware. It is not it's not like controlled by a program or whatever, right? I could like hit some buttons and make, like, I've left it on raindrops because I don't care enough to switch around, but I could like have it like spread out from a button press or whatever. I might also have the meme the meme modifiers. I bought that a while ago off of a drop, previously Mash Drop. But yeah, no, keyboards are a hobby you can like get really into, kind of like building fight sticks. Have I showed this?
You've talked a lot about your fight stick. I don't actually know that you've shown it to the chat, though.
So I built this is my classic is the what's it called? Is the suitcase.
Yeah.
I built this with some people at work. We did a group buy on this. This is an aluminum case. These are typically like plastic. The case is the most expensive part, and these are 3D printed buttons. But this is like a flat thing. Like, this is like one of those hobbies that like, it's like, oh, I'll spend a bunch of time building controllers that I won't ever use. But you know,
yeah, sure. It's like buying board games that you're never gonna play.
Oh yeah,
you know what's funny? Hold on, I have a play a little diplomacy, maybe.
Oh yeah.
Warren, friend of the podcast, is moving, and he was clearing out his storage container, and he re-gifted me my own copy of Diplomacy. He was like, hey, what board games should you buy? This was years and years ago. Buy Diplomacy. And I think we played once. And then he was like, hey guys, I'm just like getting rid of stuff out of my storage thing. Do you want this copy of Diplomacy? And I was like, yes.
Man, I haven't played Diplomacy in forever. It's been a long time. But what did you get up to this week?
What did I get up to this week? I played a lot of Total War. Total War Warhammer 3 continues to be. Are you on the Total War subreddit at all?
No.
The Total War subreddit right now, I've talked a little bit about this, is a gamer revolt subreddit. You know, it's one of these subreddits it's one of these communities where gamers have become aggrieved and have sort of created a validation site to create an identity and hating the game, right? You might call this an anti-fan, would be another good example of this. This happened obviously WoW for a long time. We on the podcast stood in some, varying degrees of opposition to people's hate of Shadowlands. But this phenomenon is one that I find incredibly interesting, and I actually secretly want to do like a deep dive episode, but I don't even know how I would want to do. I would want to do like a lot of like research or something first, because it happens all the time. It's happened in recent months with Activision Blizzard, and Bobby Kotick, right? People who say the thing like, oh, it's just going to go buy another yacht for Bobby Kotick or whatever, is like an example of how this sort of anti-fandom gets kind of created, which is the, you know, it's sort of the unfounded idea that like, and all of the decisions that are bad about your game, you know, they nerfed your class because Bobby Kotick wanted extra money, you know, like
Because Bobby
the
Kotick
most
hates
wild
you.
bad faith. Yeah, exactly. Like the most wild bad faith kind of interpretations of some of these things. The Total War subreddit has been in pretty open revolt because of the price change on a DLC. I am in agreement. I think that the price change is pretty ridiculous. They basically have just increased the price by, what would it be, like 250% by or I guess 150%. Went from $10 to $25 for about the same amount of content. And it's left people pretty furious. But now it's getting to a kind of circle jerk where people are memeing on the memes. And so this new thing that happened in the Total War subreddit was people showing old maps from beloved Total War games, like Total War Shogun. And they were, and with a bunch of just the most bad faith interpretations of like only 16 factions, 11 factions that are all basically the same thing, right? Like, but it's like they're samurai. How are they going to be different, right? You know, which I thought was pretty funny, to be honest. To be honest with you, Total War Warhammer 3 is still a triumph of a video game and insanely good. But the thing I wanted to bring up, which I thought was interesting, was I saw a YouTube video where a guy had this clickbait title. Is like, this is what you miss about Total War, and he talked about how in Total War Warhammer 3, every faction in the game that you can play starts in a singular region, right? At war with a singular province and a singular like minor enemy. Your first turn is defeating that enemy, then taking that province, and then kind of like going from there. And his sort of thing was previous Total War games, historical Total War, had very different starting positions because history doesn't work the way that Total War Warhammer can work because it's fantasy, right? In history, for Total War Attila, for instance, you have the Western and Eastern empires, which are both huge, right? But they are crumbling and there are massive loyalty problems among your infrastructure, right? And so it is, you have lots of resources, but you are on the verge of collapse at any moment, right? When you're playing the Western Roman Empire in Total War Attila. You can also play Total War Attila from the perspective of Germanic tribes, right? Or Attila himself, who are politically united, right? And very solid and very stable, but very small, which is what allows them to, you know, make their attacks into Roman territory to accomplish whatever their goals are. I played Total War Attila. I played all these Total War games or whatever. But I was interested by that asymmetrical sort of thing because it's something that's true of Europa Universalis, for instance. Or Hearts of Iron, which are also historical games where you have specific locations of specific people. Crusader Kings would be the same sort of thing. But then you also have games that are like Stellaris or Civilization, where people start relatively kind of normal, in an equivalent sort of state. Everybody's kind of getting off to the races from the same sort of basic construction. Obviously, their faction mechanics are different, all this other sort. Yeah, I don't know. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about that, right? Asymmetric start positions versus symmetrical sort of starting positions.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the asymmetrical starting positions are kind of a necessity for historical games because the factions are so similar to each other, right? There's like relatively limited differences between them. And so that's how you get a bunch of variety. This is also true for like the Paradox games you mentioned, right? Like, you know, there are small differences between the different nations, but it's not like, you know, there's a fundamental difference between a French soldier and an English soldier, right? Like there might be the specialty units, but that's basically it, and that's not even like the core of the gameplay anyway. So that is my immediate reaction. Is like the games that you mentioned that have equal starts all have like very different. They're all like they're very different categories or ways to play, right? Like Stellaris is maybe the least true of this, but like, Stellaris Civilization, everybody has like a unique thing about them, and right, and a different way to play, and they kind of like quickly diverge. And because they're more gamified than the historical games, right? It's you can heighten those differences a lot more, right? Like, Civilization plays more like a board game than like a simulation of any sort. Um, and so like, even though like marginally, right, like, or even though like most of the units are the same between civilizations and civilization, you still play them very differently, right? You can go religion, you can go tall, you can go wide, that kind of thing. And that gives you enough variety in playing to kind of like vary it up. I think that's maybe got to be part of the thing there, right? Is like you need to be able to replay these games, right? Like I don't think these games are designed to be played one and done, right? And in some way you need a way to like vary them on an axis, and in Total War Warhammer, it's by changing faction, right? Or even changing like Legendary Lord, which leaves significant differences. And but that only provides a certain type of difference, and I think I resonate with that criticism, right? That like sometimes what you want is just like the same game but from a different perspective, right? Like that's like what all of what Crusader Kings is, right? Like it's like you are playing the same history just as like the Duke of the Isle of Man, or the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, or like one of the vassals in the Byzantine Empire that rise to the empire or breaks free, right? Like all that's how you get the variety. It's like the differences in the way you you kind of like differences in the way that the differences in your positioning. Whereas like I think a lot of it's part of what Total War and those games boil down to is like differences in tactics.
Yeah, like the differences between factions in Total War is I am fighting with different kinds of units,
Right.
more so than I am in a different sort of position. I think that's partially true. That's partially wrong in a certain sense. For instance, I detect a real difference between something like the dwarves and something like Norska or the Greenskins. Right? You have some of these factions who are built to. And I think the game does a pretty good job of this, where you you have a faction that is built to do different things because of the way its campaign map works. So, for instance, Norska, the ability to make an economy in Norska is about your ports, because your ports generate most of the gold that you'll be spending effectively, right? And so, what you can do when you play as Norska is you can fill out you can get a bunch of ports, and that fuels your economy, and then you use those ports as opportunities to like go raiding. You go raiding deep into enemy territory, you sack, cities and stuff like that. You'd use that money, and you carry that money for do your economic investment. Whereas someone like the dwarves or Cathay is maybe a better example of this. Cathay, each individual province in Cathay can be a real moneymaker. You can maybe make 5 or 6,000 gold a turn coming out of one of those provinces, but it takes a while to build it up, and you have to defend it pretty vigorously, right? In Norska, I really don't have to defend my territory that much. Ports are pretty low to the ground. Buildings, they only go to rank 3. I don't have to bring them to rank 5, that kind of thing. But in Cathay, man, woof, do I really want to make sure that I like keep my territory kind of like safe or whatever. And I think that stuff does play out on the campaign map. But it is definitely a different feeling than the size and structure thing, which is kind of the Attila. This is also true for Europa Universalis, what I was thinking, right? There are easy starts in Europa Universalis, like playing France or England, technically not Great Britain. Are easy according to the logic of Europa Universalis, because they have a lot of territory, they have a lot of power. You can use that power in order to make things happen, right? The hard starts in Europa Universalis are typically smaller countries that will end up getting kind of absorbed in the crossfire. So Burgundy, for instance, which is kind of the eastern, is sort of like the Netherlands and the eastern part of France, is typically an empire that gets kind of chopped in half and absorbed into France, and then the rest becomes the Dutch. But it's like you could play a run as Burgundy where you conquer all of, or something kind of along those lines. Similar how Hearts of Iron, when you play the United States, is easy mode apparently, lose. Hearts of Iron, where you're playing Indonesia, is really hard, right? And you have to fight in order to win. Or China is really hard. You have to fight hard in order to that kind of stuff.
Makes sense. Yeah, no, I mean that makes total sense to me. And like, I think we're dancing around the same thing. Maybe I just didn't express it as clearly as like, you know, like, there's a difference in like playing with the same tools, but in like from different perspectives and in different scenarios versus like playing with a different set of tools, which is kind of what what Total Warhammer does to you for you. Yeah.
Honestly, one of the things I've been doing in Total War that's been super fun is playing the vampire counts. I've never done a campaign of vampire counts that has been satisfying until this one, where I'm playing Helman Gorst, who is just like a necromancer guy. He was a free LC Total War Warhammer 1, but his faction identity is basically just make zombies good. And fighting battles where I just mob guys with huge collections of zombies, and yeah, they're all gonna fucking die. Zombies are terrible units. They have no defenses, they have 0 armor, they have like 5 melee defense. But they have like 13,000 health, and they cost 15 gold a turn. So you can just fill huge stacks of armies with zombies and just encircle people, right? And even the toughest, the most difficult fights in the game, I was fighting against Grimgor Ironhide, who is one of the difficult lords in the game because he is just like a one-man murder house. That guy will just kill fucking anybody, basically. But he could kill as many zombies as he wants, right? For every one for every 100 he took out, they got a hit in, and that hit stuck, right? And it's just like, that was a very different way of playing the game. I have not played Vampire Counts in that way, I guess, really ever. I mean, I did beat the game with Vampire Counts before, but I don't remember it being a very fun or interesting game. This is I don't know, this is new, this is good. But yeah, so my Total War adventures continue. I feel myself waning a little bit. The other thing I was doing was playing hardcore WoW. I played a little bit of hardcore classic, which is pretty funny. I played a hunter. I went into a cave, and as a friend of the cast says, caves are graves. I would have died if there was not a who sort of bailed me out, because I was playing a hunter and I ran out of ammo. Like deep in this cave. And I also do not understand hyper spawning mobs, which are quest mobs that will spawn about 10 seconds after you kill them. So I had to fight the same guy over and over and over, because I just kind of couldn't get out of his quest radius. And I was like, oh my god, I'm level 6. I'm like a level 6 fucking dwarf hunter, and I'm gonna die in this stupid cave. But yeah, so I've been playing a little hardcore classic. We'll see how deep I can go before I inevitably get, wrecked.
Makes sense. I mean, I have not played a lot of WoW since we downed Sarkareth.
Yeah, fair.
I need to do my monthly, get my my stuff done. But
Oh my god, I didn't do my monthly last month, actually. I did buy some stuff at the beginning of the month, but I didn't.
Well, I want to definitely finish up, because I think next month is when the monk set is up. There were like certain things, like I bought the preset just because I thought it looked really cool, and that's the only time I've bought something out of that it wasn't for my class, since I historically never play alts. But yeah, I did rewatch the Mandalore review of The Mystery of the Druids, which I do every October, just because it's fun. It's a dumb game, and Mandalore does a great job with it. Yeah. If you are unfamiliar, it is that screaming druid. He's like, type deal.
Yeah, you played a character with that face, and I remember, who's that character?
Wanderer.
The Wooden Wanderer. Okay.
Yes, he may be making a return at some point for a different game. That another friend of the cast might be setting up. So I have been going to the Stable Diffusion AI hole and like trying to get it to produce good photos for let me see if I've got a good one I can quickly throw up on screen. To do this. Yeah. So I did this by basically I've been feeding prompts into this AI, like learning how what's it called, how this all works, like not learning how it all, like getting all of this to work or is tough, right? Like you just gotta keep like doing prompts until something works. Let me see if I can get this up here real quick. Oh no, that's the template. This is the logo. I might just give up in a second.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't care enough to figure out how to do this. I will have it set up for next time if people care. But yeah, that is, I've been spending time prompt engineering, and doing that kind of thing. But
okay,
I think that's basically been my week. But do you have anything else you want to talk about before we jet out of here?
No, we're way over time.
Yeah. Well, if you'd like to email us about anything we talked about on this show, from Christian Esoterica to hardcore World of Warcraft, you can email us at somederpsgames@gmail.com, or podcast@somederpsgames.com. You can follow us at twitch.tv/somederpsgames, or youtube.com/somederpsgames. These go out live. That's everything I have. Buddy, you have anything you're looking to promote?
I have nothing. Oh, I do have one thing I'm looking to promote. On Thursday this week, there's the Indie Horror Showcase, the Dread XP Indie Horror Showcase, which I feature in. I have a video in there. I have 2 videos in there, actually. One video that I speak words in, and one video that I directed, essentially. So that is 10 a.m. Pacific, I think, on I don't even remember the Twitch channel. You guys can figure this out. You're smart, okay? And also probably you pay attention enough in locations that you'll be able to see that showcase when it goes up.
Arahe in the chat says that they're emailing us to complain about our war on Christmas, which is, fair enough.
Did you know, have I told you this, Lord, that the war on Christmas started in my hometown?
Really?
Not technically started, but the modern explosion of the idea of Christmas, which came out of Bill O'Reilly in the early 2000s. Bill O'Reilly is the one who popularized the idea that there's a war on Christmas. He was talking about Maplewood, New Jersey, because Maplewood, New Jersey has more Jews than Christians. But the chamber choir concert at the end of the year in the holiday season was mostly Christian songs, and the Jewish parents got mad, and they were like, "Hey, what the fuck?" And so our school banned Christian Christmas music, essentially. Because it wasn't quite a ban. It was like an unofficial ban where they just quietly took all of the Christian stuff off of the thing. And Bill O'Reilly ran with it. One of my friend's moms went on Bill O'Reilly to complain about it because she was like a conservative Christian, and she was like, "Oh, you should be able to sing Little Drummer Boy at the Christmas pageant," or whatever. And it's just like, wow, yeah.
Yeah. Well, now it's about, stars on cups or some nonsense.
Yeah, it exploded out from there.
Yeah, although it's my impression is that kind of like the modern version is like you find 3 people complaining on Twitter and write a story about it. Right? Like I remember there was it was last year or a couple of years ago, there was a thing about like I said, like the Starbucks cups were vaguely less Christmassy, but it turned out that was 4 yahoos on Twitter complaining about it rather than any actual significant pushback.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, not to turn this into it. Well, whatever. We're not gonna.
Yeah. We're definitely not doing politics.
Yeah,
this week, especially given the religious stuff, right?
Yeah, for real, for sure.
I don't want to touch any of that.
Hold on. Do you want to know what the last Exodus thinks of Israel? Okay. Should I look that up?
Until next time, loyal listeners.
I actually do want to look what it says. Until next time, loyal listeners.